Hello, hello, hello. This is our first video for AP Statistics with Mrs. Miller. I'm hoping the volume's okay. You have just finished watching the video from a fantastic colleague of mine who also teaches AP Statistics, and he gave you a general rundown of some background of what statistics is. We're going to move now into a bit more focused to begin our very first unit of study. You should be following along on your fill-in-the-blank note sheets. Some days our videos will look different. Today is just going to be following along on a PowerPoint. Other days you'll be seeing me with a document camera and taking notes with you. Some days you might even see me in person. But today it is just on PowerPoint. So follow along and fill in as we go. Obviously, if there are things that I say that aren't in your, fill in the blanks, you'll still want to jot them down. So what is statistics, right? Our AP Stats guy kind of talked about this a little bit. It is the study of variability, or the science of data. It's, like I said, broken down into two big sections, descriptive statistics and inferential, but we can divide it further into four different aspects. Data analysis, which we'll be doing in chapters 1 through 3. Data collection, which will be chapter 4. Talking about patterns, anticipating them, and looking at probability. And then our last hunk of the course will be inference. Now, these are just some things how they all collect together. If we have a big population that we want to know about, we collect data from that representative sample that came out of the population, right? Our sample is a subset of our population. And then once we have that data, we want to do stuff with it. We perform data analysis. We'll probably make some graphs. We might run some numbers. And then after we've done all of that, we will make an inference about that population that we were interested in the first place. So just kind of a lovely little graph here to show us how it all relates together. So some of the vocabulary that we're going to be focusing on in this video, individuals, variables, and we're going to talk about the two different types of variables. And then we'll also talk about distribution and inference. Now, variables are any characteristic of an individual, right? It's what we want to know, right? It can take different values for different individuals. Each individual is a different thing. Everyone has different things about them, right? I am 5'6". I weigh 300 pounds, and I don't like pickles. Those facts might be different about you or somebody else. It's always important to note if there are any units in your variables. So when I say that I am 300 for my weight, I'm talking about my weight in pounds. Individuals are going to be those objects, or excuse me, the objects described by the set of data. The objects described by the set of data. And they don't always have to be people, right? It could be animals, or it could be things. You can measure the weight of a goat. You can find the height of a tree, etc., etc. The individuals are who is being described by the data. So you collect data from individuals, and the variables is what you're collecting. Now, there are two main types of variables. There's categorical, which is sometimes called qualitative, but in our course we're going to typically call it categorical. And then there's quantitative. Categorical variables places an individual into one of several groups or categories. Now, just because it's categories or groups doesn't mean it can't be numbers. It can. It's not typically numbers, but it could be. So area codes, for example, or your social security number, or your zip code. Excuse me. Those are all examples of categorical variables. Now, your quantitative will always have units of measure. That's another way you can tell. Quantitative variables take numerical values for which taking an average, or the mean, right? We'll talk about mean later on, but taking an average makes sense. Now, you can put these into categories. So if you get a 90% on a test, that's an A-. If you are a certain IQ, right? Say you have an IQ of 100, you could be labeled as average. That's a category that relates to a quantitative numerical value. Now, again, just because it is a number doesn't mean it's going to be quantitative. So, couple examples, just so you can kind of see the difference between the two. Some basic categorical variables: gender, race, your grade as far as, sophomore, junior, senior. And then some quantitative examples: weight, height, GPA, etc. So if you want to jot down some examples for yourselves, that might be a smart thing to do. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is distribution. Right? We're going to use this word a lot this year, distribution. We're going to be studying many different types of distributions as we go throughout this course. In general, here's what you need to remember. Distribution tells us what values the variable takes and how often it takes these values. That's really what it boils down to. What values it takes and how often it takes them. All right? Distribution applies to both categorical or quantitative. You can use the word distribution to replace words like data or graph. So, as you can see down here on the right, this is a dot plot of miles per gallon for, I'm assuming, a collection of vehicles. Okay? And we'll talk more about dot plots later and how you create them and how you read them, etc. But some ways to describe it: you can say the median of this distribution, the median of the data, is 28. Okay? Or you can say the distribution is skewed left. The graph is skewed left. And again, we'll talk about what that means to be skewed later on, but that's how we would use the word distribution instead of saying words like data or graph. You're describing the data and how often the values take, or what the values the variable takes and how often it takes them. And then last but not least, we have inference. You heard about this in that previous video. Inference is drawing conclusions that go beyond the data at hand. This is the big reason why we study statistics, because we want to know about big picture things. And oftentimes it's not possible for us to gather data from an entire population because the population may be too large. So you have to be looking at samples and then using our good methods that we'll learn about this year to draw conclusions that go beyond that data. Now, the ability to make a good inference is determined by how the data are produced. We'll talk in much detail about how you would collect data in a proper way so that inference can be done. If you don't collect your data in a good way, then your inference, while you might try to do it, might not be accurate, or it might not be a good use of your time or your energy, because what you're concluding doesn't actually reflect the population in which you are interested. All right, thus concludes our very first video, nice and short and sweet. If you need to rewatch it, please feel free to. If you need to go back and listen again and add some more notes, by all means, I encourage you to do so. In class tomorrow, we will be talking more about this video that you just watched and seeing if we can apply some of these new vocabulary terms to real life situations. All right, have a great day, guys.